PvP in Escape from Tarkov is broken, and I'm going to try and fix it all without balancing a single gun or ammo. Now, to say that PvP is broken doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be fun. You would actually agree with me in thinking that Tarkov is some of the best and worst PvP of any FPS game in history. So, let's break it down. First, we have to talk about why PvP is broken. You will hear a lot of opinions on this depending on who you ask, and to be clear, none of them are inherently wrong. People want different experiences from Tarkov, and that's okay. And it's also okay if you're not the type of player that wants to get into PvP all the time, but they didn't make this game single player for a reason. It's a PvP game, and you will run into PvP eventually, and when you do, it should work. Now, you'll hear a lot of different people talk about the good old days of Tarkov. What I find funny is that not everybody agrees on when that time is. However, I do think that oftentimes people tend to look back on the past with rose-colored glasses, overlooking bugs or other things that we didn't like about that time. However, I have found myself feeling more and more recently that I too miss those good old days. And I've spent a lot of time asking why. What about the old days was so much better? And I think a lot of people might want to hone in on one specific thing like Recoil or TTK, old Recoil good, new Recoil bad. But I think it's more complex than that, and I don't think the solution is as simple as just going back. I think it can be broken into two main categories, the mechanics of PvP and the incentive to PvP. So here are the mechanics that I think are ruining the PvP experience in Escape from Tarkov. Aim punch, blunt damage / collateral damage, painkillers, inertia, and there is a bonus one that I'll talk about towards the end as well. At its core, I think PvP is broken because we so often don't feel in control of our character. It feels like all of these mechanics were made in isolation and that it wasn't really considered how all of these things would interact with each other. The first mechanic I want to get into is aim punch. Aim punch is when the game actually pulls the camera and your gun away from your point of aim while you are getting hit. While I understand the realistic element of this, we are missing the most important parts of that real experience, which is that we don't feel ourselves getting shot. If we could feel how our body was reacting, we could intuitively correct for that. But instead, it's all a guessing game. We are trying to react to something that is completely out of our control. And it's not consistent at all either. You never know when it's going to happen to you. It doesn't happen every single time you get shot, and you never know if you're doing it to your enemy. And since most of the animations are client-side, it can often look like you're aim punching your enemy because their barrel is pointed up at the sky, but in reality, they're pointing right at you and shooting at you. Can you ever think of a time where you were in a fight, you got hit, saw your camera fly way off to the left, died, and then thought, wow, what a cool experience that was? The worst part of it is that when point firing, it seems like there's little to no aim punch at all. It might still be there, but it doesn't feel nearly as bad. I did a whole video on this a while back, but it just feels so backwards since that when ADSing, you think you'd have a little bit more stability, not less. I would personally love for them to remove this mechanic altogether, or at least tone it way down and make it more consistent somehow. The second mechanic is the blunt and collateral damage. Now, this is actually two separate things, but the game does such a bad job of explaining what they are and how they work, I'm putting them together. Blunt damage is a percent amount of damage that makes it through your armor when a bullet hits you but does not penetrate. Meaning if you have really good armor and it stops a bullet, you'll still take a little bit of damage to simulate how much it would hurt getting shot even if you had armor on. Collateral damage is actually two things. One is the colloquial definition where a bullet penetrates one part of the body and continues to damage another part of the body. For example, a round going through one leg and then hitting the other leg, or a round going through your arm and hitting your thorax. This is also what allows us to get those ultra rare collateral headshots, killing more than one enemy with one bullet. Separately, when you have a blacked out limb, like your arm for example, if you get hit in that arm again, it takes the damage from that bullet and it applies it to the rest of your body since your arm is already at 0 health. This is an oversimplification, but it's good enough for now. Unfortunately, at the post-raid screen, this is called collateral damage, meaning that you get shot once in a blacked out limb and every single part of your body will show collateral damage. These mechanics seem so wildly overtuned that I genuinely don't know if they are bugged. Actually, I am almost positive there is a bug where your arms have more than one hitbox that are supposed to act as one hitbox, but both of them can take damage from one bullet when they're not supposed to. Additionally, these mechanics also stack with the fragmentation damage. Fragmentation is when a bullet does 50% more damage based on a random percent chance that each bullet has. Speaking of fragmentation, there is a bug that has been in the game for years where if a bullet has less than 20 pen, it cannot fragment, even if it has a high fragmentation chance. For example, the ripped slugs that shotguns use are supposed to fragment 100% of the time, but they literally never do because of how low the pen value is. Can you see how this is confusing and wildly unintuitive yet? The game gives no information to the player on damage, penetration chance, or fragmentation chance of the ammo. It never mentions blunt damage or the calculator for how much damage you will take to a blacked out limb, and it doesn't explain how to read the post-raid damage results. All of this means that we can never really give good feedback on these mechanics, and even if the game did give us that info, there are so many existing bugs that it would still be nearly impossible to interpret that information. These mechanics are all jumbled together to create a wildly inconsistent PvP experience. One bullet can hit you in the arm, hit that same hitbox twice, fragment for a 50% bonus damage, collateral every single part of your body, and do all that while completely bypassing your armor. Or that same bullet can hit you in the arm, not double hit, not fragment, and just do the 40 damage it was supposed to do. Have you ever felt like you shoot somebody 1,000 times and they don't die, and yet you get 2 taps to the arm with terrible ammo and fall over dead? Well, this can be why. These inconsistencies can make it almost impossible to learn from PvP encounters. The game is already complex enough with all of the damage and pen and armor classes and armor zones and materials and all that kind of stuff that these additional mechanics can make it seem impossible to know whether you are going to kill someone or they're going to kill you. It also makes armor harder to justify since you don't know if it's actually going to do anything. Taking out a slick and then getting 2 tapped in the arm doesn't really instill confidence. In my opinion, fragmentation should probably be removed from the game completely. It is almost never considered by the player as a cause of death. It doesn't really show on the post-raid stats that you took fragmentation damage. It's not explained to the player in any meaningful way, and they've shown that they're not really working on any fixes for the bugs with fragmentation anyway, so it just kind of seems unnecessary. Secondly, I would turn collateral damage way down. I did pretty limited testing, but it seems that around 80 to 85% of the damage of the bullet makes it through to the second limb. I think that could be reduced down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% of the damage makes it through to the second limb. This would increase time to kill a little bit, it would make armor feel more impactful, and it would do all of that without affecting the one-tap ability of someone. A headshot would still be a headshot. And if anything, it might actually incentivize well-placed shots over a random barrage of bullets. Blunt damage I actually like as a mechanic, but in my opinion should be temporarily turned off until they fix the bugs with the hitboxes and how the blacked out limb damage is calculated. Then it could be reintroduced in a toned down way. I might not have all the right solutions here, but at the bare minimum, BSG should consider how all of these mechanics interact with each other and balance them all together. The third mechanic is painkillers. I cannot begin to describe how many times I've been asked why I'm taking painkillers all the time while playing Tarkov. This whole mechanic has always seemed really off to me. Take painkillers before you're in pain, just in case you will be in pain at some point, so that when you are in pain, you don't have to bear the in-game mechanics of being in pain. This ends up just being that people with enough money to buy a new Golden Star or ibuprofen every raid and have high metabolism skills, just essentially completely circumventing game mechanics. And it just feels weird. Instead, I and many others have proposed a new mechanic called adrenaline. The idea is that when you get shot, you would get the adrenaline buff and debuff. This would refill your stamina bar between 24 and 50% immediately and act as a painkiller for 3 to 5 seconds. The debuff would be that you cannot get the adrenaline effect for 60 seconds or 120 seconds or whatever. So if you are running around and you get shot in the leg, even if you get a fracture or a blacked out leg, you would have 3 to 5 seconds where you could still sprint and you would have the stamina to do so. After those 3 to 5 seconds wore off, if you haven't taken a painkiller, you would be limping and you would be unable to sprint. This means that when combat starts, you have mobility. This gives everyone a fighting chance to keep moving even if you want to avoid PvP, get to cover, take a painkiller, or turn and fight. This would also make fighting AI feel so much better as well. This doesn't eliminate the strategy of trying to catch people off guard making mistakes. In my opinion, it enhances it. Then what you could do is make it so that taking painkillers without the pain effect just does nothing, and you've completely gotten rid of the pre-pop meta. Stims would still be important because of how fast they can be used in raid, and ibuprofens and golden stars and meds like that would still have a place as well in case you ran out of pain meds and still have a fracture or a broken limb. I cannot explain how much I think this would help PvP. It feels so bad to be completely immobilized right when combat starts, either because you can't buy high-level painkillers every single raid, or because you just got shot 3 seconds after your painkiller wore off. Also, I am not one that uses realism as an excuse for game mechanics. Most of the time I think that's dumb, but this just so happens to be something that is a bit more realistic than rubbing lip balm on my face every 5 minutes so that when I get shot in the leg, I don't limp. As a movement side note here, because I don't want to make a whole section for this, for the love of God, crouching and standing up from prone shouldn't take so much stamina. It should take some, and maybe if you spam those things, it should take progressively more and more. But am I to believe that standing up from a crouch takes 15% of my total PMC's ability to move and run when fully rested? I don't know about that. The fourth mechanic to address is inertia. Now, I know a lot of people have really come down on inertia as something that has ruined PvP. I think inertia is a good addition to the game. I just think it needs to be tuned way down. I've never really been angry at the inertia at the beginning of a raid when I only have my own gear on, even as a lower level with lower strength skill. I think it gets progressively worse the heavier you get, as in the top end is where inertia needs to be toned down the most. I kind of like that the game is maybe trying to force you to drop your bag before a fight or something like that, but I don't like being thrust off the edge of a building or being completely unable to pay for the car because I'm still moving. I shouldn't feel like I'm on ice skates when I try to stop. I think inertia works well when accelerating. It makes sense that if I'm heavy, it takes me a while to get going, but it seems way too overtuned when I'm stopping. When the game takes control of the character, regardless of player input, in my opinion, that feels bad. Additionally, the way they implemented inertia means that you can kind of completely bypass it if you want. Instead of just using AD to strafe back and forth, you can use WASD to circle strafe, and inertia is basically completely gone. Not to mention that momentum is calculated based off how long an input is pressed and not the amount of distance traveled, meaning that you can just run directly into a wall for 2 seconds to build up your momentum and then fly by a doorway. To put simply, we used to have 0 inertia and it feels like they threw the lever up to 10. How about we try a 4 or a 5 before we get rid of it? Now, the bonus mechanic here is recoil, which is probably something that's top of mind for a lot of people when they think about PvP. I know I said I wouldn't talk about any specific guns, but that's actually kind of the point. In my opinion, the biggest problem with recoil isn't that any one particular gun is too laser beamy, it's that the entire recoil system as it stands feels weird. They tried to design a system where the PMC was automatically compensating for recoil since we're so highly trained. I understand it. It was a cool idea, but not only does it feel weird because there is no other system in the game where we can rely on our PMC to automatically compensate for an action that a player is doing, but also because it creates a behavior that BSG is very obviously trying to prevent: full auto meta. When the most accurate shots out of your gun are all the ones after your first 10 shots, then high capacity magazine full auto meta always wins out over single fire or controlled bursts. Literally holding mouse 1 while looking around or swapping between enemies is better, because if you let go and then start shooting again, you've completely reset the recoil and you get all the worst recoil again. It just feels like our guns don't have butt stocks at first and then all of a sudden magically do halfway through our magazine. This too is inconsistent. How come our highly trained PMCs automatically control for recoil when firing in full auto, but then pistols have like 300 recoil? Wouldn't our PMC be trained enough to fire a pistol relatively flat as well? Now, Nikita did recently confirm that they are redesigning the recoil, so here's my 2 cents. Just take a kind of normal recoil system that most other games use, where the recoil grows over time, and add some Tarkov to it. Add some randomness or attachments that maybe tighten up the spread a little bit. That's okay. Find a balance where the player feels like they can get good with specific guns and learn them, but there's also a little bit of Tarkov's hardcore thrown in there. To go all the way back to the intro, the reason that Tarkov has the best and the worst PvP of all time is because of the inconsistencies. In those rare cases where it all works, when you get into a long drawn out battle where you feel like the equipment you chose set you up for success and you were able to use your map knowledge and skill to come out on top, when those things happen, it's magical. No other game I've played can come remotely close. The problem is that those moments come so few and far between, and for all the raids that feel terrible, there's almost nothing to learn from those experiences. Now, the last point I want to make here is on the incentive to PvP. The game currently provides very little incentive to PvP, and really to PvE as well, especially as the wipe progresses. The weight system seems to almost punish you for doing well. If you kill 3 or 4 PMCs, you are almost completely immobile after you loot them all. And before the realism chads come at me, the other thing I don't understand is that you can completely avoid the weight system with money. Just pop a mule, an SJ6, and a Trimadol, and you can run forever again. It's like the weight system is only there for casual players. Either double down on the weight system or tune it down. Once again, this all applies to PvE as well. Kill all of Gluhar and his guards or Brashala and his boys and try and loot them up, and the same things apply here. This looter-shooter punishes you for shooting and then looting. Additionally, when you do kill a few PMCs, it's actually almost never worth it to take their loot anyways. Ultimately, the meta is insurance fraud anything that you can, and then just take some magazines with good ammo and a few attachments, and then go loot the high value tech loot or trinkets or valuables that are just lying around, because that's more ruble per slot, and then you can just buy all of the gear that you left behind anyways. Once again, this actually also applies to PvE as well. There are a lot of different ways they could attempt to fix the economy and gear and all that kind of stuff. I'm actually going to do a whole separate video on that topic, so watch out for that coming soon. Diving into the problem of the economy in Tarkov is too much for this video, but suffice it to say that there isn't really any in-game reason to PvP. Now, as we just stated before, when it's all working well, the PvP in this game can be extremely fun, and that fun can be the incentive for a while. Getting into a wild, heart-pumping fight or winning a 1v3 or a 1v4 can feel amazing, but that feeling doesn't last. For the long-term health of the game, there needs to be a reason to keep engaging with it. And currently, almost anything on any other player you can just buy from the traders or the flea. The most valuable things on the map are not attained by fighting players or AI, they're attained by just picking up single slot high-value items. And if you do get into a ton of combat, the weight system makes the rest of your raid feel bad. Now, there is obviously more to PvP than just these things, and Lord knows the game definitely does need a balance pass across all the individual guns, the ammos, the economy, and how we access all of the gear. Things like audio, desync, and cheaters can ruin even a perfectly balanced PvP experience. But I do think that these things play a much bigger role than people realize. I think the point I'm trying to make here is that even if the game was perfectly balanced and perfectly optimized with no cheaters, what most people, and maybe even including some of the devs, haven't noticed is that all of these mechanics mean we often don't feel in control of our fights. We lose fights we thought we should win, and we win fights we know we shouldn't have. And the game doesn't do a really good job of incentivizing you to go get those engagements. I know some of you will comment that these things are just what make Tarkov hardcore, and I'm preparing for those comments, but I couldn't disagree more. No one was saying it's just because Tarkov is hardcore when the audio on half the maps was non-existent. No one was saying it's just because Tarkov is hardcore when there were invisible players every raid. This is how I view these mechanics. When you take control away from the player, it actually gets in the way of what really makes Tarkov hardcore. The fact that when I kill you, I take your stuff and I make it mine. The fact that you can exploit my mistakes and get the jump on me. The fact that you never know if you're about to run into a solo or a 5-man. The fact that with one well-placed shot, you can bring down a Chad with more gear than you'd ever seen before. Not everybody wants the same things. Not everybody wants to PvP all the time, and that is totally fine. But in this instance, I don't really think that's what we're talking about here. This is a game with PvP, and you as the player get to decide how much or little you engage with, and I think that's a good thing. But when you do engage in PvP, which you will have to do, the mechanics should feel fair. It should feel like you're in control. That's how we learn, that's how we get better. Because when it ends up being a coin flip, you will definitely win battles that you shouldn't have, which is fun, but you will also lose battles that you know you should have won. And that is not hardcore. Thank you so much for checking out this video and listening to my opinions. And that's all this really is. It's just my opinions. I'm under no assumption that I can fix every single part of the game or that I am the authority that everybody should listen to. I would love to hear your thoughts about these solutions or these mechanics and what you think makes Tarkov PvP so great and so terrible down in the comments below. If you like this video, think about dropping a like or subscribing to the channel for more content like this. I stream Escape From Tarkov live about 6 days a week. All my links will be down below. I'd love to have you stop by and say hey. And if you're looking for people to play Tarkov with, our Discord server is an awesome place to be. That link is down below as well. Thank you again for stopping by, and I will definitely see y'all on the next one.